Hello and welcome once again to Workshop 1138. I'm Robin and today I'm going to be looking at part 3 of my Teddy Ruxpin Refurb. What we have here is two 1985 Teddy Ruxpins and a pack of drive belts. I'm just going to point at this one first. This happens to have only 2 servos in the head and this white cassette mechanism, which has also got the little sensor in there that senses for these holes to see if it's a proper Teddy Ruxpin tape or not. And we've also got this type, which I'm more familiar with, which has got this sort of silvery insert in the cassette mechanism, and this again is the 3 servo version. Now they're both slightly different inside, so I'm going to be starting with this 3 servo version, and we start in the usual way by removing the 2 screws that are just inside the battery cover and the 2 screws that are either side of the volume control. We use a screwdriver to lever off the back, just to loosen any of the clips. In order to get access to the drive belts, which are somewhere in here, we need to remove the circuit board. Now there's a few wires that go off to things such as the motor and the tape heads, which connect to things within the tape deck themselves, so I'm going to remove those. You may want to make a note of exactly where everything comes from. If I take that one off and this one here, those are all the wires that don't go to the internals of the bear. So there are now 3 screws that I need to remove. So one at the top, there should be another one down here at the bottom, and the final one is here on the corner. And because we've removed these other wires, we are now completely separated from the main circuit board. Now, depending on which model of Teddy Ruxpin you have, you might find that you're still tethered to the internals of the bear by one orange wire. Now, with a flat blade screwdriver, a very small one, you should be able to just press very gently on the inside of that particular slot, and what you're actually doing is there's a little spring out clip here, which is forming part of the locking mechanism, and by pressing in you're depressing that clip and that will release it. Now I'm just there with a pin. I've just levered that open ever so slightly so that the next time it gets pushed in it should lock again. So you'll need to do that after you've replaced the drive belts and you're putting everything back together. But for the rest of you, you don't need to do that at all. And the problems you can get with 30-year-old drive belts is that the rubber will have stretched, it will become less elastic, and also it may in fact snap. So the main reason that I'd like to replace these drive belts is that this Teddy Ruxpin had started to chew cassettes. This is largely due to the capstan still maintaining a decent speed, but this sort of take-up reel, which is winding the slack within the cassette to keep the reels tightly wound, actually not doing its job, and this resulted in occasionally I'd take the tape out and there'd be a little loop hanging out of one of these due to the tape not being wound in properly, and occasionally as well we also get the problem that there's considerably more tape has just got wrapped around the capstan roller down here just because this wasn't turning. So the thing we need to do now is to get access to the 3 screws that hold the tape mechanism within this plastic. So first thing I'm going to do is remove these two screws, and that will give me access to another screw that's in that little hole in there. We also need to take out that one and the one that's at the back here by the motor. So while we're there, let's remove that one. I can't quite see that one. Okay, and we need to remove this metal clip. And now we have access to this third screw. These are all quite rusty, and it's quite important that you've got the correct size screwdriver. If you've got a size that's slightly too small, you might end up stripping the screw, and that will be the end of things. This whole mechanism should be loose, and I'd forgotten something. I need to remove this plastic strip, which was most definitely getting in the way. I'm hoping I didn't glue it in too well last time. Okay. I just need to be careful on the wires on the back of this tape head, but we've just got to wiggle things, and sometimes you might have to wiggle things a bit sideways. There we go. We've now got access to all the drive belts. So let's take a closer look at those belts going round. We've got this long belt, which is quite slack, which is going off to the between the motor and the capstan spindle. And there's a second belt underneath, a much smaller one, which is going off to that take-up reel. So I'm going to remove the old belts, and I'm going to measure them. One of the websites I looked at to do with cassette belt replacement actually suggested that you order something that's probably 10% smaller than the belt you take off. So what I've got here is a 44mm belt. I've just positioned that over the top of the original belt so you can see that it is considerably smaller, and this belt is labelled as being 32mm in diameter. Before I fit the new belts, I'd like to actually give these grooves the belts running a little bit of a clean. I have here a piece of string, and I'm just going to strip this down slightly. Twist this up, and I'm going to run this through some isopropyl alcohol. Grubby, what have I told you about that? That's not for drinking. I'm going to try and not get the IPA on any of the other moving parts. And not forgetting, we've also got the motor itself, and the last one's a bit tricky because we have to go right underneath. I think everything's had a reasonable time to dry off, so now it's time to fit the other belts. So in refitting the belts, we need to go with the one that's the smallest first, and we'll loop it over the top of this big pulley. And with that on, I'm just checking all round to make sure that there are no twists in the belt. That looks good. It's certainly moving fairly freely. There's a little white V-groove pulley right there. And we'll just guide it around with our fingers. Have we got any twists? It went on with a twist, but it may have actually corrected itself. No, that is actually twisted. So we can see that if we follow the line of the belt, that actually goes underneath. So I need to take this off and refit it. And this time we fitted without a twist. So as we come to refit this, we've got to make sure that it meshes correctly with the cassette door lid. So we've got these two bits that stick out and sort of get in the way, but we need to make sure that those are in an appropriate position. I think that's us lined up. The longest of those 3 screws from here need to go in that piece. And finally, we've got the little screw that secures the motor bracket to the plastic housing. If you find the cassette door has a little bit of slop in its movement, in that one end or the other is able to wander about a bit as you're opening and closing it, you may need to just bend this little metal bracket slightly and refit it. Because this is the retaining thing that's supposed to hold that in place. I feel I should probably pause the video at this point and make mention of the sort of 8 minutes or so of material that I've edited out. Mostly due to keep the flow of the thing going, but I'll just mention it quickly because what I've done is I've moved all those sections into part 4 of my Teddy Ruxpin Refurb videos. It's all to do with the setting of this metal spring and all of the various ways that this, if this is set incorrectly, will cause no end of problems within the tape deck. For me, I'd somehow managed to jam the mechanism in such a way that I couldn't close the cassette door, and decided that bending this spring was the best way of putting that right. The video partly explains why that was a bad thing to do, but for now, back to part 3. One of the things I'm going to do, I'm going to just go around the edges of these bits of plastic here where everything makes contact, and I'm going to use some white lithium grease. So let's loosen those screws up there, and you see you don't have to loosen these up much, and all of a sudden there's a lot of play in that whole plastic mechanism. And I'm just going to use a cotton wool swab. Probably see I've just put a little bit in the base of each of these grooves, some on each of these plastic cams and on the bits that make contact. And I can now tighten this off. So we need to reattach the circuit board with these 3 screws to make sure we don't actually trap any of the wires underneath. It's a little bit fiddly, particularly as I'm trying not to disconnect it from the rest of the bear. And I know Teddy Ruxpin is supposed to not be a bear, he's supposed to be an Iliop. However, when you've got one in bits and it's quite obviously a mechanical mechanism, to me it's a bear. That's 2. And if any of these screws drop inside while you're doing this, you'll probably find them stuck on the magnet on the back of the speaker. So I can re-plug these Molex connectors. They are indexed, so they should only fit one way round. Moments of truth.
Then you will have to know something about the effects of wind and various aspects of navigation. It's very simple.
Well, it all sounded very confusing at first, but Leona had been flying all of her life and knew just what we should do to make the airship work.
And now it's time to look at our friend with the cream coloured tape deck. So this is the plastic one. As you can see, it's actually very similar. So we've got 3 screws in pretty much the same position. And this time round it's only the wires at this end of the board that seem to be keeping us from disconnecting this plastic piece from the rest of the bear. Make a note of where you take everything from, and always grip the plastic connector when you're pulling it out. Don't pull things out by the wires. They won't thank you for it in the long run. This has suddenly got very destructive. It will glue back, but that's not pretty. We've got 3 screws in pretty much the same place as on the other one, only they're securing plastic to plastic rather than plastic to metal. So if I take out the 3 screws, and in case my hands were in the way, one of the screws was there, one of the screws was there, and one of the screws was there. The pinch roller's not on a separate bracket, and we can still see that there's a circlip on the top. I'm just going to fetch one of my other rollers and just check it for size. Yes, it would appear that the pinch roller on this one is actually much larger. I think I should measure that. Unfortunately, I can't seem to find my micrometer, so I'm going to have to go by the old-fashioned method, and by eye with this ruler. It appears to be roughly 9.5mm in diameter, and I can say that it's very slightly under the size of this 10mm drill. Therefore I'd be happy to go with 9.5mm, and it's 6mm high. So we just unhook the one end off the motor, and there's our band, and almost immediately, if I just get one of the 44mm belts, which is the same size as the large belt on the other Teddy Ruxpin, we'll see that that's actually going to be a pretty good replacement. Quite difficult to get anything wrapped around this motor. I'll just gently do these electrical contacts while I'm at it. I've reduced this cotton wool swab down just by trimming at it with the cutters. I think the hardest part of fitting the new belt is going to be hooking it over the motor. We just lift this copper spring, I'm just checking everything's running smoothly and there are no twists, which there aren't. If there were any twists in there, it might mean that the belt generates a bit of extra friction as it moves, and it might be a little bit harder for the motor to turn it. It also might wear out a bit quicker. Now I can see why I was having so much difficulty. This thing wasn't in the correct place. There we go. And now that it is, that's just pushed back nicely into position. I'm just noticing we actually have a nut that pushes into that hole on the tank mechanism, and there's a corresponding screw with a very small thread that's not a self-tapper. I'm going to put that longer one with the finer thread in there. I think I need to hold that in position while I put this one in. pretty sure these three almost identical self-tappers were from the circuit board. We can plug all the rest of the connectors in the order that they're indicated on my diagram, which is a very useful thing to keep. Leaving only that to be glued back in place. Well, I hope you found the video useful, or at the very least found it interesting. There'll be a couple of more Terry Ruxpin videos coming soon. Part 4 of this video series will be involving the setting of this metal spring thing. And in part 5 I'll be looking at the phenomenon of stuck servos, and is there a way of getting them to unstick without either having to massage the eyes and mouth on the front of the bear, which obviously risks damaging something, or opening it up. I think there's another way. And don't forget to like or subscribe, and hopefully I'll see you again soon in Workshop 1138.